There's a reason why there's only about 6 people in the landmark sphere that are speaking up, that have actual direct experience as program leaders and staff. But there are hundreds that are not speaking, that are quietly in rooms, some of them hopefully listening to this conversation, trying to understand where did it all go wrong.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Atack to this very day, and this is Anne Peterson, who wrote the book that you can see in mirror image behind me,
Oh, that's
and
funny. Yeah, look at
and the
that.
right way round. Oh, spooky. So yes, we have this essential question of the transformation, the human potential movement, and as you said
How we
before,
doing?
how are we doing? And you know, what benefits has it given to our society? And are we possibly living in a straitjacket created by the human potential movement? If you go back, there's a place called Ascona in Switzerland, and you look at what was happening there at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. People, Carl Gustav Jung was there, D.H. Lawrence was there, and it's like the Esalen of the 1890s, all of these theosophists and what have you.
Oh, wow.
And it it's something I've been studying recently or looking at recently, and it's quite scary seeing you get a group of people come together and they've got these wonderful ideas about transforming society. And then, I look at Esalen and go, no, I'm really not happy with that. And as much as I love Ken Kesey as a writer and as a person, I think he was a wonderful, wonderful person. Nonetheless, giving everybody acid to change the world, I don't think it really did a great deal of good. It did a great deal of good for some people, but not for others. And I think that brings us to the point of human potential. It's if you got something out of it, then you've got that out of it. And that's yours. That belongs to you. With Scientologists, when they'll come along and say, well, but didn't you have wins? And it's like, yeah,
Mm.
okay. I got high. Yeah, I had wins. I felt euphoric. I felt 20 feet high and all of that stuff. I felt competent, and that meant that it gave me a confidence to go into the world and do things. And that's great. Um, but where else could I have got that? And was it specifically because of these techniques? Because what I see in the techniques, and certainly with EST, Forum, Landmark, that
Yeah.
whole set of large group awareness trainings, the methods that are being used are shock therapy of a type. And I'm reading, let's just reach home and find this. Reading this at the moment, which is very interesting. Rebecca Lemoff, who's a Harvard
Oh.
professor of history of science. I really don't like the cover, but the instability
Y-
of truth, brainwashing, mind control, and hyperpersuasion, all in mirror image. It's fundamentally a history of the ideas that are called brainwashing. And relating that to John Hunter's fine book, which I think everybody should read. I think it's a
Yeah. It's
really
excellent.
insightful, straightforward way of looking at things. But what happened in the Chinese communist camps, and I've read a lot about this over the years, is that you were stressed out. I mean,
Mm.
you'd be handcuffed and chained and spat at, and it's a slightly more extreme version of the original est process. Um, but because you're in chains, uh, you had to have your cellmates help you to make water, as one of them says.
Okay.
You were humiliated, abused, reduced to nothing, and you'd go into a cell where your other 8 cellmates were at the last stage of the process. They might have been there for a couple of years going through this. And what they had to do was get your conversion, your confession, and then they could leave. Then they talk about, you know,
You just described the advanced course.
yeah,
So the advanced course, oh my God, that's freaky. The advanced course in the what they call the curriculum for living is there's a piece of it. There's always somewhere in the midst of it. It used to be 4 days. I don't know what it is. I think it's probably down to 3 now. I don't know how they're doing it now. But was and it was all around integrity, that the integrity of the group, they would do this thing, and oftentimes the leader would sit in the back and wait 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, I've heard of sometimes 9 hours for the group to sort itself out. And usually the thing that would start it is, I don't know, 2 people came back from the lunch break late. And so then the leader would confront the group and say, hey, I actually had this happen in Haiti. It's so interesting, things that I thought were miraculous. And now when I examine them, I'm kind of like, is that really, did it really have an impact? Because we had a thing, I worked with a group, a graduate was very passionate about delivering a landmark forum in Haiti. And we did two of them, plus a leadership course through this particular NGO. And the first one, it was an incredible experience. But the first one, there was a situation where people came and they took two lunches. So one of the big things, we had 300 people, just over 300 people there, and they're hungry in that country, and so we were supplying a breakfast sandwich and lunch, and so several, like the first 75 people in line, many of them took two because they'd take one home, right? So then there were people in the group that didn't get to eat.
Mm.
And so the leader did this whole thing after lunch. We let him know that because we're running the program and we know, there's people at the end of the line who don't get food. And they use that whole thing, very advanced course style, to say like, okay, wait, but who are you for your community? Who are you, when you take two, somebody doesn't get one. And and then they kind of work on that till they sort it out for themselves. And different people in the group have who are more leaders in the community, a pastor, the mayor of one of the towns, anyway, they all stand up and they say this and that. That to me was like a more direct and useful version of what happens in the advanced course because they do something similar in the advanced course.
Yep.
But where they have the whole group work with something. But here's my question to you, John. What's the problem with that? I mean, doesn't that sound like good? And is there a problem? Maybe there isn't. I don't know. That's not particularly where I see so far in my learning, where I've seen the worst of the harms is in those kinds of processes that happen in the programs. But it
Yeah,
strikes me that it's very much like you were just describing in the Chinese camps. Same tactic.
yeah. You you have to shame somebody, and you can of course shame them for something that they've done that's shameful. But shaming somebody, getting them to feel guilty, and then
Mm.
manipulating that guilt, and it works. It's been going on for a very long time in our society.
It's not working over here in the US anymore, for the record, just so you know.
Well,
Shame seems to have gone the way of, as my mother used to say, dodo bird. But I
yeah,
guess that's just by the people in charge. But
and many of their followers, of course, that they came to power by being shameless and through a series of processes that make you have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You have to say,
mm,
we are the elect. We're the people who have realized. You're the people who have not found the way, the truth, and the life yet. And so, we are superior. And because we are superior, and it's going to be hard. I mean, I had this guy who came to me many years ago and he spent a couple of hours with me and he'd been a kind of closet Scientologist for years because he couldn't afford the courses. He was a disabled guy, and Scientology doesn't pay, it's to make the able more able. But he'd been involved for years. At the end of our conversation, I said, it's a fascist organization. It does harm to people deliberately. Here is Hubbard's policy saying, ruin these people, destroy these people. This is, and he says, there isn't enough time for us to act in any other way. We have to. To
mm,
be compassionate for the future, we have to send these vermin to the concentration camps and get rid of them. It's like, that
wow.
an attitude of mind is created. But with the Chinese program, you have this reducing the person, reducing them, exactly what John Hunter is talking about in terms of restricting dopamine. But it was done in the most extreme way possible. And
Mm,
what you want from people is confession, which is to say the admission of guilt. Those confessions would be false, they'd be exaggerated, which of course you'll also have seen in large group awareness trainings where people would be, for example, abreacting their birth, which was very popular in the original S days, that people would start crawling around and pretending they were being born. Primal therapy was, off at the
yeah.
side. Of course, Hubbard's Dianetics was another aspect of this where people are abreacting birth. And you're going, well, you're not abreacting birth. I'm sorry. You're making a spectacle of yourself in front of the group. You're debasing yourself in front of the group, acting through something, which is, it has to be imaginary because, you don't have any memory of your birth. You can't have any memory of your birth because physiologically the brain
Yeah.
wasn't constructed enough
Wasn't
for those
wired.
memories
Yeah.
to be there. Yeah. So it doesn't mean it doesn't do you good. That's the other place we come to, that if we
Mm.
take aside that the idea that your experiences are all real and say, no, you imagined some of them. So, you thought that 75 million years ago, Xenu gathered you and dumped you in a volcano with it and gave you 36. If you feel better after that, it was therapeutic, it was positive. But is it true? And the truth question is the big one, that are the experiences you're having real? When reading through, because I read your book, I then went off and read Outrageous Betrayal on your recommendation.
Right.
Thank you very much. And I read the paid for William Bartley the
Bartley.
Third's,
Yeah.
and that was a revelation. Firstly, I mean, the words that we've used in this conversation, you've talked about advanced courses, the advanced course in Scientology, it's plural, integrity and confronting. Werner Erhard just cherry picked Scientology ideas, and he didn't do it all. He sort of had this kind of ADHD approach where he grabbed a bit from, say, Chuck Berner's Abilitism, which is a Scientology spin-off, and a bit from Silver Mind Control, which is a Scientology
Right.
spin-off, and a bit from Mind Dynamics, which certainly had Scientological aspects to it. So you've started with something that's not nutritious to start with. You've started with
Yeah.
something that's not actually helpful. If you throw in then the crazy idea of the 5-day Zen, which is fundamental to us. I don't remember the name of the Japanese teacher, but it's laughable in terms of,
Mm.
Buddhism itself. So he gets these kind of new age abbreviations of therapy, these things that are
Yeah.
being sold,
Well, he gets
packages them all together.
enamored. He gets
Yeah.
enamored. And I've seen this. I saw this with Yoga Man, which was another guru that I was a client of mine. And with a few that I've worked with, they get enamored. They go do, they read a book or go, and I do this to an extent as well. I
There's
get it.
infatuation, there's
It's like
limerence.
this,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, but these guys have their own thing. So they turn around and their next course, I used to see this with Yoga Man all the time because I was codifying content for him so that it
Mm,
could be replicatable.
yeah.
He could scale, he could teach other teachers, all this stuff. And I never could complete one because in between when I would design one, put one whole manual together for him, and the next time when the objective was to watch him lead it and fine tune it and tweak it, he would have gone to 5 courses and want to put in 5 new things,
Yeah.
kind of things. And I'm like, wait. And part of why he hired me was because he didn't really understand the concepts. I told him, I said, look, you're delivering something, you're excellent at reproduction and you're good at interaction, but you don't actually understand the distinctions, as we call it in Landmark. You don't understand the ideas themselves. And I can teach you that. That's why he
Mm,
hired me. But I learned after a while he didn't really care. He didn't have any interest in understanding the ideas themselves. Now, I think Werner's a little different. I think Werner is more, I've sat in a lot of rooms for a lot of hours with Werner
mm.
putting out material and ideas, but he's very enamored with this idea and he can leave and go to lunch and come back and be onto something completely else. Like it doesn't, he's going to react to whatever the team puts up in front of him. There's this whole thing about making sure you put up in front of him what you need him to pay attention to, because
Mm.
anything you put in front of him, he's going to dive deep into, or his version of deep into for that period. So,
He's going to dive shallow into until the next thing. And he's
yeah.
not actually going to acquire the skills of any of the disciplines. And the disciplines he was going to were all of them fake. Silver Mind Control is about how to do
Mm,
astral travel, which of course was very big in the early S days, this idea of
yes.
exteriorization in Scientology. Well, no, it's not happening. It's not actually real. Then you've got ideas about healing other people from a distance, which is the concept of prayer in Christianity. And yeah, I think prayer is a nice thing, but I don't think that it has a telepathic, magical aspect to it.
No.
It's a good way,
It's soothing is what it
yeah,
is, really. I mean,
and it's a
being,
way of being, having a compassionate relationship with the world, where you are saying, I would like these good things to happen for others. Then, of course, it becomes prosperity Christianity, and oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? And you get the
mm,
righteous gemstones, which at least we get some comedy out of it. But the sense that I had in the what I've read about Werner is he's absolutely shallow. There is no enlightenment there. There is no compassion for other human beings. He has the brutal behaviors of all bullies, of all sociopaths, of all malignant narcissists. And I strenuously feel, and I've brought this up before, that he probably has temporal lobe epilepsy. Certainly he had the injuries in infancy and childhood. You know, he cracked his skull twice. So one would think that the temporal lobes may very well have been affected. And his behaviors, if you look at the Barefedio indicators, there are 18
Hmm.
categories. I've just been through them for a chapter about Hubbard, and I've gone through them carefully with my friend Yuval Laor, who understands these things better than I do. And Werner is a dead ringer for this condition. And
Really?
what they're actually broadcasting is their certainty. But what you've seen is that his certainty changed from one day to the next as he found some other novel thing that will go, oh, yeah, no, this is the way to do it. With Hubbard, every 6 months from 1950 onwards, he would cancel what he'd done before and say, you know, of his first book, he said it's hypnotic. He said it very clearly in lectures and in the book Science for Survival of 51. He said you shouldn't do it. They're doing it now.
That's
They're
interesting.
selling it now.
That's
So
interesting though, because my direct experience of Werner is quite different than what you're saying, and I don't I'm
how is it
definitely
different? How is it
very
different?
different. Different in that, first of all, when he's interacting with people, his the experience is this kind of like intense intimacy and love for lack of a better, there he does come across and in the interaction with him as being somebody who is incredibly compassionate. Although what I think maybe what's happening there, whether it's compassion or not, he does have a deep thing about getting into another person's world. And
Cognitive
because
empathy
I've,
is a characteristic of psychopaths. That what you feel
yeah,
with a psychopath or a sociopath is you feel totally understood. Then you look at the way they treat those around them. Do they bully the
that's where
people
the
around them?
disconnection is.
You look at
That's what set me. Yeah.
how his wives ended up, his lack of a relationship with his children. Same with Hubbard, that they appear to care, but it's an appearance of care, and it's something that we buy into because we've been conned. You know, it's what they can
So
do.
here, so here's my question. Is the con inherently bad? Like, this is what I'm really exploring at 56. I started all this when I was like 27,
Mm.
and I'm talking with a lot of people. My book has had a lot of people reach out to me
Yeah.
that have spent 10, 20, 30, 40 years in these ideas. And, and I'm looking at the world around and I'm kind of going like, I don't think this shit works. Do you know? Like only now, when I look at my own self, though, I have a very good life. I have a life that really defied the predictions of the early, predictions of my life. I'm being a teen mother and on welfare, and and
Mm.
I have a by most standards of successful middle class life. There's no way to say whether I would have had that without Landmark because I did Landmark and I
Mm.
was deeply, deeply involved. So that you
And you
can't
didn't have an
really.
identical twin sister who's from whom you were separated at birth who didn't,
No, I
badly.
have a sister that's 2 years younger, and she's trauma filled and her life is
Mm.
quite messy. So even by that standard, if you took the two of us, you'd be like,
Oh.
oh, you should definitely go do Landmark.
Mm.
But I also, 2 years older, I always say that all of my sister's problems are due to my total and utter domination of her from the moment of her birth. Interesting, this thing, what you're saying, like, so in and I've seen people have these interactions with Werner, and they're like, one of the last ones particularly impacted me because he had a whole interaction with a person who came to the leadership course a couple of times. And then the next year, he had almost exactly the same interaction. Now, he didn't remember this person, and I should have, if I had this to do all over again, I would have sent a note up to Werner and said, "Hey, you had this interaction last year. This person needs psychological support, not, racket, not training in rackets."
Mm.
Which Werner did know, by the way. He actually had a long kind of interaction with this person who had been in the military, was having some suicidal thoughts, had in their military service, they had been in a secret service and they had done things that were really deplorable and they were dealing with that and they were trying to use this, human potential landmark style training to deal with that, which it's not the right tools for that
No,
issue.
no, absolutely not.
but Werner he actually said that in the interaction, but then he kept interacting with him and he kept kind of trying to make a difference, as it were. But my sense was it was mostly out of his own curiosity. Like he's a very I don't know if you call it pseudo intellectual, but he loves ideas and he loves to spend hours turning them over and upside down and inside out. And when I look at his work across time, he hasn't actually really changed it that much. That's part of the problem because he's stuck really closely to the transformation, or as they refer to it in that organization, comes from revealing your shame, revealing what's wrong about you, telling the truth. And all of his iterations from est, which was much more of the synonym encounter, you're an asshole and your life doesn't work confrontation style, to then what evolves in the forum, which is more a revelation. Oh, this is how human being is designed. And when you can see your design, you can see where your weaknesses are, where your faults are, and you can strengthen them. I mean, that's the whole thing behind human potential, right? Like find out what's weak and strengthen it. The older I get, the more I think that's just wrong, actually. It's just wrong. If for nothing else other than it doesn't work. Because look at our society. It's like a disaster zone. Somebody said to me the other day, like, oh, if everybody in the world just did the forum and they got rackets and they got strong suits and they got integrity and they got those distinctions in the forum, the world would work. And I said, well, how come 3.5 million people have done it? And a lot of them, yes, some have gone out and made a really positive impact in their communities, but for the most part, they're just plugging along like every other human being.
Yeah, and the Hunger Project, the 20 years, it didn't solve the problem of
No.
poverty and starvation. In fact, it didn't really have make much of an impact. It had an impact because there were genuine people who were doing it, good people, and that becomes confusing as well. But there are so many false ideas that are perpetuated. So the first is the idea of human perfection, the idea of enlightenment or illumination. And as somebody who, from the age of 17 into my 50s, believed absolutely in this idea, Scientology was always secondary to me. I was in the pursuit of enlightenment, and Scientology was a way of achieving emotional equanimity. I believed it isn't emotionally. It makes
Mm,
people worse. It makes people more dependent, more brittle, more fragile. It doesn't strengthen you. But so, you have some idea of human perfection. I don't believe in that anymore. I believe that we function not by becoming independent, perfect nodes of being. We function within a network, within a scale-free network, within a network of relationships. And I accept that when disaster happens in my life, it will upset me. I will not
mm,
be, Teflon actually proved to be quite a bad thing in the world, gave us
right.
C8, which we're all suffering from. So, so if I, just rationally, if I behave in a decent way, if I behave in a kind way, if I care about other people because I care about them, not because they're paying me, not because they're my disciples, but I care about them because I actually care about them. So I'll remember that last year I had a conversation with this person, and now you're bringing the same problem to me. And I'll remember that you're a human being I've met. Unlike Werner, who's like, I'll just give you the same stuff that I gave you a year ago, and I've got no idea who you are because I don't care about you. What I care about is my prestige in the situation and the amount of money I'm making, which that's certainly those drivers for Werner, the amount of money and the amount of power and control, reading about, and what you've told me about what you saw, the way that he treated his subordinates. That's not liberating anybody.
Well,
That's not
you're right.
creating their potential.
You're right in the cognitive dissonance of the whole thing, not just in the landmark lexicon and the Scientology lexicon and the Nexium. I mean, all of them have the
Yeah.
same thing. And I think we're now seeing it play out in a much bigger level in our politics and so on as people with great conviction. Ex We're duped by our experience, it seems, right? So my experience of Werner was, he was kind of brash, but he was mostly loving and kind in this kind of twisted way. I mean, ruthless compassion is one of his hallmarks, and that does fit it perfectly. And my logical brain is like, that's insane.
Hmm.
But my emotional, responsive
It's like
mirror neuron is
friendly
like,
sadism, you know? It's like, come on, guys.
yeah, and
Ruthless
and
without mercy. Compassion. Oh, yeah. Compassion is having
right.
mercy. That you can't, it's oxymoronic. It can't happen.
Yeah. And that was what set off my whole thing in my book was as these, people close to him were coming to me for literally for help and what to do when their, salaries were being stolen and they were being physically assaulted and verbally. I actually learned what constitutes verbal abuse versus, just harsh coaching or whatever. And I was like, what? How can that be? But even more shocking than that, and I want to know what you think about this, even more shocking than that has been so my book was my journey of kind of trying to sort that out for myself and what I came to, which was really a strong stand as I've dug into it for a safer, more ethical personal development and
Yeah.
self-help field.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm about. And now, though, since I've heard from so many people, that culture that I thought was a Werner personality issue, proclivities, whatever, is actually systemic in the organization.
Yeah.
It's baked in
Yeah.
to the organization. And at first I thought like, okay, that's because they're all emulating Werner. But I'm starting to suspect there's a bigger problem
Mm.
than that. It's not just emulating Werner, because most of the people leading in that organization, up until about 2015, he got back involved directly and
Mm.
directly like training forum leaders and things like that. But a lot of them hadn't even met him. I didn't even know. I met him in 2010, barely knew about him in my early years when I was leading in the organization. So, in the staff culture in particular, I've now had 3 or 4 people tell me about their managers strangling them,
Yeah.
which is beyond stunning to me, not just because a manager is strangling an employee, but because that's Warner's kind of one of his key physical abuse moves. When he
Yeah.
loses his stuff on a person, he, strangles them until they see stars. And I'm like, wait, how did that get? And I'm fairly certain that the people who did that with their own employees don't even know that about Warner.
Mm.
So that starts to point to something for him like, well, wait a minute. How does that kind of behavior become systemic?
Yeah. Is
And
there
then
such a
what's the role of the work, as we call it in Landmark, in that?
yeah, Flavel Yakeley, one of the best names ever. He was the president of the American Personality Testing Society or something. And he was asked by Kip McKean, who was the head of the Boston Church of Christ, which was the origination of the Churches of Christ in London, wherever they are. And McKean had somebody, possibly Steve Hassan actually, had said, "You're running a cult." And he was deeply offended by this allegation. And so he hired Flavel Yakeley to do personality tests of 900 members of his group. And Yakeley was staggered by what he found, which was he did a test and he said, "How were you 5 years ago? How do you want to be in 5 years' time?" And he found that there was a trajectory to one. You have 16 personality types within the Myers-Briggs, which is not safe science, but it's a
Not,
way of
yes,
looking at things.
I'm doing some neuroscience studying right now, and they're anyway
Yeah,
making that point. That's
yeah.
not scientific
So
stuff, but yeah,
with Jaak Panksepp or something like that. Yeah, is that who you're
yeah.
looking at? Yeah. Um, but whatever. Who's very interesting. I don't agree with him either. But that's where I am. But Myers-Briggs, as a way of testing, what he found was that members of the Boston Church of Christ had they were moving towards exactly the same identity. So they would have the same elements. So then he
Hmm.
went and tested Scientologists, people in the Way International, and I think Krishnas. And he found that in each case there was a different personality type but it belonged to that group. They would, and he used the word cloning. He wrote a paper called The Discipling Dilemma, which you can find online. And he said they're cloning. He then looked at mainline Christian churches. I believe he was himself a mainline Christian. And he found that you found all the personality types in every congregation. So there was some process that was taking place. Now, I would say that there are two elements to this. One is cloning upon the actual behavior of the leader, and the other is cloning upon the idealized concept of the leader. Now, yeah, we've had a couple of
Mm,
people attack you in the comments, and I'm not having that. Sorry, if you want to ask a question or make a comment based in fact, but making personal attacks on people shows that you're not understanding this problem at all. You're not willing
right.
to think about it if all that's happening is an emotion. She's a dreadful person. I don't like the way she does her hair, whatever.
Right, right.
And I do like the way you do your hair. That's not. But when people get into the ad hominem attack, attacking a person rather than discussing the ideas, something has come up, and that defensiveness of what we believe, of course, that's natural. We defend our tribe, we defend our family, we defend our
Sure.
religion, whatever, belief
Yeah,
system. But when it becomes knee jerk, then yeah, Scientologists don't have to have met Ron Hubbard, and they certainly, I had no idea how he behaved in private. I thought he'd be a lovely, friendly man who'd, sit around and chat with you for hours and help you understand the world. When I found out that he would, with Werner, it's strangling. Hubbard would go up to a few inches away from somebody's face and scream at them that they're a
oh, that's
complete loser. He'd cover them with
yeah.
spittle and he had foul breath because his teeth rotted in his mouth.
That's what
And
comes ahead of the strangling, by the way. The more
yeah,
I hear about L. Ron, which that's another interesting thing, more I hear about L. Ron Hubbard, and then I look at Werner, I'm like, whoa, I mean, almost identical. Yeah, it knows. I mean, Werner and I got in some, I mean, one where he was screaming at me, right close, and then I got in his face actually once too. So let's
good, good.
not,
So
not
fair's
be.
fair. He cloned himself on Hubbard. It's evident from looking at the things he studied, and none of them he completed. He would dip, as we've seen, he'd dip in enthusiastically and say, "All right, I've got that now." And there's this, you're going to sit down with Erhard and you're going to say, "Tell me about Spinoza. Tell me about Spinoza's ethics." And he's going to go, "What?" You're going to go,
Mm,
"Tell me what the Reader's Digest said about this." You go, "Oh, well, that shallowness," which again with Hubbard read Gibbon's Decline and Fall, the 1910 or 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica articles from there, and the abridged version of Fraser's Golden Bough. And as I've come away from it and studied it, you go, he only read 10 books, serious books, but he could tell you bits about those books. The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant, and I would admit, he dedicated his first book to Will Durant, who was a very popular historian and describer of philosophy, whose ideas I thoroughly disagree with, but we won't get into that because it's very toxic masculinity as far as I'm concerned, the Durant school. But nonetheless, that's where he got his philosophy from. He didn't read Spinoza, he didn't read Plato, he just went, oh, he certainly didn't read Kant, nor can I. It's impossible. But there's no depth to it. There is the appearance of enlightenment, but an enlightened person behaves in an enlightened way. And if they're not loving and kind and friendly, there's something very, very wrong. Because what will happen is their followers will become like them. They'll start, having done a 9 month study of the Nazi leadership. I
yeah,
keep promising myself every 10 years I'm not going to look at anything else, but it's so upsetting. But understanding what they believed and how they came to believe it. And there's a great book, a guy called Ashkenazi, who was in a concentration camp as a child,
mm,
went to the US, became a fighter pilot, then became a psychologist, and then ran a home for delinquent, violent children, adolescents. And he wrote a great book called Are We All Nazis? In which he looked at, which I read 30 years ago, which he looked at the Nazi leaders and he said, actually, none of them is classically a psychopath. That you've got this thing that they really were trying to make something
yeah,
good happen, and you're going, by beating people up, by torturing people. It's like, yeah, they're getting, it's tough love. You have to kill a
Right.
certain amount of people. And this perfect society will emerge where people who have, yes, superpowers, what Himmler called electron powers, that, he was
Mm.
breeding people to do this in the Lebensborn, possibly 20,000 children, including Frida from ABBA, as I always say, were born in Lebensborn homes where the father was an SS officer and the mother was quite often a slave who'd been captured because she had blue eyes and blonde hair. She might be Polish or Norwegian or what have you. And they ran these programs with the sincere belief that they were going to make Übermensch. They were going to make, and not in Nietzsche's sense. That's a common, I believe that too, that they were coming from Nietzsche. They're not. They're coming from an American eugenicist. That's where they got the Untermensch, Übermensch from. And the idea that you can breed super abilities, superpowers, supernatural powers into people. And once you've
So
caught hold of that, you start going, well, that's the right thing to do. That's the proper thing to do. And unfortunately, the Jews are misbreeds. The Romani are misbreeds. The Slavs are slaves. Himmler ordered the destruction of 30 million Slavs, and they certainly passed 20 million in the murder campaign to Moscow. Just unbelievable numbers because they believed
mm.
this would bring goodness to the world. So once your leaders are corrupt, then the system is corrupt, and you need to
When
step
you
back
can
from that.
see in the what I call the human potential movement, personal development, self-help, as it's emerged from the 60s, 70s, 80s,
Yeah,
90s, which is I was born in 1968. So
starts
that's
with Carl
my
Rogers, all very nice, the Third Force, and,
well, you
and
can see
Eugene
the
Gendlin, Murphy, then
one of the
Fritz
things.
Perls. Yeah,
Well, first of all, so Werner takes his name, from a German,
Heisenberg.
so, yeah,
A
and
Nazi, in fact, let's be honest
a
about it. The head of
Nazi
the head of the
loves
Nazi
Nietzsche
atomic
and
program.
yeah, all this stuff. But it seems to me as if then the human potential movement, if I kind of lay that on what you were just saying, is this thing of, okay, we are going to create a human being through distinction, through intellectual tech. We are going to create a more ethical, more responsible, more integrous, more self-expressed. One of my big gripes with it is the hyper individualism, which is just so fundamentally off from from the way the world works and the way human being works. But anyway, if we set that aside for a second, but the whole thing, and when I look over at the Werners and the Yoga Mans and the ones that I've known, I think they do really believe that in some way. Now they have this ulterior motive called money and fame, and that's you can't separate those two really. But I do think, like when I think about my direct experience with Werner, he was absolutely his life's work is about creating ideas that create a better human being. And that's what people like the sounds like my troll. I'll have to go look at the comments. I haven't even looked at the comments on your sounds like they found your show.
We have deleted and blocked them. I'm not doing it. I will not have
Oh, really?
people.
That might explain why
Tra
they disappear off of my thing.
yeah,
Or I
I'm not having them
deleted
trading
hominem.
insults. That's
No.
stupid. It's childish. It's
Well,
offensive.
it feeds all the stuff that we're
Doesn't
not
help
trying to
anybody.
feed. Well,
Yeah,
and here's the funny part, and those are the transformed people.
yeah.
Those are the enlightened people. Like,
Transform
so this,
trolls.
it's interesting what you're saying that there's this like logic that we're going to make a difference, make a world that works for
Mm,
everyone with no one and nothing left out. We're going to be more ethical, more integrous, more responsible, leaders. And yet, but then there's this behavior that's underneath that. And it's the behavior that actually comes through. That's really interesting to me,
mm,
except for with the people that it doesn't. So you mentioned the Hunger Project, for example. So I'm deeply acquainted with the Hunger Project in its modern version, and it's quite extraordinary.
mm,
I contribute money to it. I happen to one of my dearest friends was the global CEO from about 2018 to 2020 or so, or 27 like that. And I came to know the Hunger Project in its current, what it is now, which is
mm.
very different than what it was at its inception.
Yeah.
And, now it is an organization that is about, trainings and working with people where they're at. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And, but it's adapted. it's learned, it's evolved. And to me, that's what the landmarks of the world and Scientology, they haven't done. They don't adapt, they don't evolve. And with new science, which by the way, the book, I just looked it up, the book where I'm right at the tail end of it, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain by Lisa Feldman Barrett. So I'm listening to a bunch of her stuff and it's
Okay.
so good. And as I'm listening and the new science that's coming out and as we're understanding the brain, it basically makes all that human potential stuff not just obsolete, but
Oh yeah.
quite harmful because it does separate people. It separates them by simply putting them in two camps. In the landmark world, it's graduate and non-graduate.
Mm,
And you do get more and more sort of separate from the people in your lives that are non-graduates because they just don't understand, they don't think alike, it's hard to talk to them, whatever. And you don't realize that's happening because in the courses you go to, it's all about better communication and better relationships. And but what's quietly in the background is better communication and better relationships with people who believe as you do,
yeah.
which is
Uh,
exactly what you're saying in the sort of Nazi, it's in that whole way of thinking that somehow this way of being, therefore these kinds of people are better than these other kinds of
mm,
people. And that's definitely integral. Now, Landmark has done such a good job of softening all of this crazy stuff. When I hear you and Chris and whatnot talk about Scientology, I'm like, oh yeah, Landmark took that and put it in a much better outfit, put it in a much more acceptable
mm,
kind of approach, which is fine, but it breaks down as soon as you become a program leader, a staff member. As soon as you take on some sort of accountability in the organization, that's where it breaks down.
mm,
And why a lot of the staff members and former program leaders that I know that are speaking privately to each other will not speak publicly, though, and I'm curious what you think about this, is because they don't want to damage people's transformation. So, because we lead these courses, it's a weekend, and we see people come to these amazing insights and breakthroughs, and it looks like miracles. And we don't want to take that away from people,
I can,
especially,
if you, 90% of people give me 10 minutes and I'll give them a transformation. How long will that last? I know all of the techniques by now. I've
hmm.
written about all of the things. You find a way and you get somebody, when I was in Scientology, there was a young guy and he was interested in tripping and taking LSD. So I took that on board and I said, okay, 10 minutes. We sat down and we did training routine zero, where it's bastardized in Landmark, but and called confronting in both systems. But you do it sitting down in Scientology, which is a traditional Indian way of doing it. Goes back a long way. I sat with this guy and I said, I just want you to look at my eyes, keep still, and until you feel comfortable. And he went, wow, after about 10 minutes. Because what had happened was the Ganzfeld effect. Now I know what it's called now, and I know what happens that brings it on. And when I look at the S trainings or any of these trainings, they're using simple physiological methods and psychological pressure to bring about dopamine release, just as John Hunter
That
says.
peak
Yeah,
experience, right? Yeah.
exactly. A peak experience. But the problem is that it doesn't fit Maslow's definition of a peak experience because when you come back to it, you were just high. It was not a revelation. It was not that, you saw that there was no moon in the water, as the Zen monk says, that, it transformed your life. It was just you got really high. You felt really high. How did it change your life? If somebody is defending a set of techniques based upon, the instant reaction, you've got to be able to look at least 3 years of a person's life. You've got to be able to say, well, what happened? Did they go home and break up with their spouse? Did they go home and tell their
So,
boss
yes,
that,
I did that, right? Okay, so this is
which was
really
the
good.
right thing in your
It
situation?
was the right
Yeah,
thing. And
but it isn't
the
necessarily.
in many of them, yeah. And for my landmark friends out there that might be listening, hopefully you are listening and starting to learn and explore and whatnot.
And
And
question and
fundamentally,
challenge. And please come into the
question and
comments and do
challenge,
that. Yeah.
which I say let's do that so we can do it better. We do not have to give up human development. We can do it better. I don't know, maybe I'll change my mind the deeper I get into this, the more I think selling shoes at Nordstrom's is a good idea. But the whole
Nordstrom is a good store, what can
I
I
know that
say?
was my dream job when I was
I got
20.
great shoes there when I was over in LA in
I get
the
all my
80s.
shoes from
Yeah.
Nordstrom's.
I buy
The
Echo. Let's put in a ECCO Danish
uh
shoemaker. Absolutely
oh,
fantastic. And
excellent.
and they don't fund this show. So
Aha.
it's
Oh,
just me
wow.
being
It's just
compassionate towards them.
a raw thing. Well, and compassionate towards all the people who you want their feet to feel good.
Exactly, I
So
do. That's
the
important.
be with, so what you just described is in Landmark what they call the be with exercise. So where you stand face to face and you look at another person's eyes for a period of time. And what you start to find, or what it feels like, is you start to find your humanity in theirs. You connect.
Werner did
Also,
this to such an extent that he can rip anybody's head off with great compassion. It's like,
that's
no,
right.
it didn't work.
Because you kind of surrender into that space in a really deep way. And reading this Lisa Feldman Barrett's work too, I'm seeing where co-regulating, there's a whole nervous system reaction that's happening there in the work I do with the
Pacing, as hypnotists have been calling it for a
Mhm.
century. Yeah.
The Ridwan School, which is a school I study with now and do a lot of work with, and for myself. And my teacher one time went on this thing, or one of the teachers went on about how that was a not a good practice. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, "Wait, what do you mean? Like we do that in Landmark all the time." And he said, "No, no, because you can't be responsible for what you can really overstimulate somebody's nervous system, and if they've experienced trauma or this or that." And that's one of my big criticisms is that none of this work is trauma informed at
No,
all,
no.
and not in the way we understand it now. And but so here's my pushback. So I'm interested. So I have this like peak experience. I'm like, whoa, and I'm high. Can concede that for sure. And then I go out and I do things. Like my case, within a couple of weeks, I was like to my then husband, I'm like, yeah, you should leave. Because remember, I did the forum because he said he was going to leave me and I was freaking out. We had a 3-year-old, little daughter together. And I believe very strongly that parents should do everything to stay together and raise their children together.
I
That
took
is a
four
belief I
children and two
still have.
marriages and catastrophe, and I would never advise that to anybody. If your marriage is not
Ditto.
working, get out and
Gotcha.
make
Well,
it safe for the children.
first make
Don't
it work.
pretend, because
Yeah.
then the children will grow up to pretend as well. So don't be
I
nasty
guess
to your
here's where my
spouse.
thing is. Even my son came to me one time. He's like, Mom, and I think we're going to break up. They had a brand new baby. So I think we're going to break up and da da da. I'm just kind of not getting what I need. And I'm like, that's not what marriage is about. Like, knock it off. There's a line there. Yeah, for sure. If your marriage is harmful or damaging, you should get
Yeah,
out. But I
read,
mean,
read
there's a lot of
Eric.
people that are just like, well, I'm just not. They just don't make me feel it anymore. So I'm going to go
Yeah,
find the
yeah.
next
I'm
one.
I'm not the perfect me. And yeah, The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. You know,
Nice.
there's a fundamental textbook when he gives this great analogy where he says, so you're a painter and you know you're a painter, but you can't paint until you've got the right subject matter, and then you'll be able to paint it. And that's how people approach love. I'll fall in love,
Mm,
and it will, no, you have to learn what the colors are, how to mix them, what the support is
right.
that you're going to paint on. Love is something you learn how to do. You learn how to
Right.
be in
I think
relationship.
that's the advantage of having two marriages because I'm on my second marriage. And one of the things that you learn in that process is that you are wherever you go. So maybe there's some work to do that isn't about that other person. But so
Yeah.
back to this peak experience thing. So, because I think that's what people are defending. See, that's what that reactionary
No.
person that's what they're defending is like, you don't understand, John. It is miraculous. It changed my life. So you have this like huge peak experience. And then I love the way Dr. John talks about it. It's a little bit like the slot machines, whether the actions you take out of that experience benefit your life or harm your life. Because he talks about how in a mania, people accomplish amazing things in a manic episode.
In a
They
hypermanic episode, probably not in
are,
a manic episode, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, in a hypo. So that's kind of what it's like. And
Yeah,
what's
you're
interesting to
driven, you
me
can
is
achieve.
Well, I'll send you this essay that this person just put up on an est site about the 50 years later. They are still absolutely adamant that the most valuable thing they ever did in their life, bar none, hands down, no matter what, is the est training.
Yeah.
Which I heard a
And
lot more from and this person makes the case about how that was the case in the S training, but the forum just has never it's never lived up to its predecessor, which I also find sort of fascinating. But what has me questioning it so much and so deeply for those out there that's like who know me and I was even their leader and they're like, wait, why is she changing her tune? I'm not actually changing my tune. This is the same tune. I'm changing my instrument.
yeah,
And so the same tune has always been, well, what has people be a better version of themselves, which I've always wanted to be since as long as I could remember. So I think that's a natural human drive. And it's like, oh, I want to do better next year than I did this year. I want to be a better parent than maybe my parents were. Or I want to, it's just a natural thing. And that's all I'm after. And after 25 years of personal development, I'm kind of like, I don't know that it works as well as I thought it did because so many people I know aren't doing great. They're really struggling in their relationships. They're really struggling and they communicate funny and, people kind of stay away from them because they don't want to hear about their inauthenticities and that thing that they made wrong about you 20 years ago that's had them stay away and the cost and the impact on your relationship and da 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 da. Like it's
yeah. I
not
mean, to some extent, you can live life or you can analyze life. And having watched so many people go through so many systems, and having stood back from all systems since I left Scientology, I've studied a lot of things, but I have not you know, I,
not a joiner.
my friends went off and, I have three friends who went and did neuro-linguistic programming. I know Steve Hassan well, who spent a year with Bandler and Grinder, the people who originated it. So he got it from source. And he said they were always at each other's throats. These people that developed this therapeutic system, they
Mm,
hated each other. And he's around. But the three people I knew who experienced it at the more normal level, it was fascinating watching the changes, the transformations that happened in them as a consequence of doing this. They didn't become better people. They didn't become nicer people. They didn't become more helpful or useful in the world. They became more smug. That was, and
interesting.
then one of them one day went, I've learned all of these ways of watching, which muscles are moving in your throat, so I know, which ways your eyes are going, your VAK and all of this, visual, audio, kinetic, all of this stuff. I've stopped listening to what people say. I've stopped being there anymore because I'm analyzing everything. And
Mm,
that sort of everything has to be broken down rather than actually being in the moment. And the idea that in 10 minutes we can show you what it is to be the king of the world, what it is to have achieved Buddhahood. It's not true. You have to do the work. You have to become the person by living. And certainly for me, the experience is, yeah, the two dreadful marriages, dreadful for my wives as well as for me, that I went through. That taught me. It taught me don't marry somebody that doesn't like you, doesn't
yeah,
really,
that's
really
bad.
like you. And now I'm married to somebody, we really love each other. And the world of difference. So you're going, transformation, actually being with people who have your best interests at heart as well, being with people who are kind and seeking to be kind. I'm not I'm not seeking transformation. I don't think I'm going
Mm-mm.
to live forever or light up the sky with my name. I don't think I'm going to go to heaven. I don't think I'm going to reincarnate. I think I'm here and it's fantastic. What an incredible thing to be on this planet where we're the only species that get to enjoy ourselves. Which other
Mm.
species actually enjoys itself? They're all too busy fighting things off or trying to find enough to eat or what have
I
you.
don't know. You should meet my dogs. They seem to enjoy themselves
Well,
quite.
those creatures that rule human beings,
Yes.
my cat also, there's another thing. But nonetheless, our capacity for pleasure is so far beyond any other creature, and yet we waste a whole lifetime being scared of death, That's a big one. Ed
Hmm.
Becker's denial of death. That's a big one for many people. Oh no, I'm not think about that. And not saying, well, here I am. Isn't it fantastic? The flowers in the garden, going and seeing a wonderful building, looking at great art, being caught up in a play or a moment. So rather than striving to become something, as L. Ron Hubbard said, there is beingness, but man believes there is only becomingness. Well, he was a man who was frantic not to be caught, not to be found out, just as Werner is. So they're never actually happy. They're never actually settled. They've got the kind of divine right of kings, this sense of, they're in charge of people. They're the elect. They're the God makers. But that's like taking cocaine, frankly. It's like, so what? And I think it was Robin Williams who said that cocaine is God's punishment for people who have too much money. Um, that so I sat in a club one night with years and years ago with this guy who was looking at his watch, and I'm like, what are you looking at your watch for? He said, well, if you take cocaine more frequently than every 7 minutes, you can have a heart attack. I'm going, so you take cocaine and then look at your watch for 7 minutes till you can take cocaine again. That's what I see in so many of these groups, people who are actually desperate, pretending to be happy,
Yeah.
pretending to be relaxed, pretending to be comfortable, and they're actually just watching to see what's going on and to make sure they fit in. What Eric Fromm called the pseudo self, which he said was how Nazism came about, that people didn't develop a self. They weren't comfortable with themselves. They weren't happy in their own skin. They didn't like the way they looked. They didn't like they weren't clever enough. They weren't competent enough.
Now,
And
do you
life
think,
is working towards competence and towards accepting this
yeah,
is the way I am. This is who I am, you know?
do you think that there are people, because the more I look at it, I'm kind of coming to this. So I know a lot of people, myself is one of them, honestly, who did work like Landmark and blah blah blah, and have done good things in the world. My husband
Sure.
and I had a hotel during the Katrina hurricane, and it became dubbed by local media as her Hotel Katrina. We took care of over 800 that we know of,
Mm,
over 800 evacuees. They couldn't leave our hotel because they had no place to go. And my husband, God bless him, stood in the center of the hotel and said, "No, you're going to stay right here and we'll figure it out." I mean, the same thing he's doing in our life right now. I'm like, honey, we're building our dream home and we're going to figure it out. And I keep asking him, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And he said, "No, no, we're going to figure it out." I'm like, "Oh,
mm,
okay." And and tons of self-expression and leadership program. That's the third program in the curriculum. It used to have a component, kind of got pretty watered down even at the tail end of when I led it, where you do a project in the community that's about a possibility being
mm,
realized in the community. And what I say to people who are like, but what about all that stuff that Landmark had me do? And I'm like, Landmark didn't have you do that per se. You are bent that way and
mm,
you use the tools and the opportunity that Landmark, the structure
mm,
that Landmark gave you to go do those things.
mm.
And I think it's fine to give them a certain amount of credit for that. Like they
Yeah,
have some
sure.
great structures, like why not? And my thing is the source of it isn't Landmark. The source of it is you. You are a kind person. You are a person who's compassionate. You are a person, you have a certain kind of values and outlook on the world, and then you take tools that Landmark offers and you do great things with it. Just like this is another problem I see in these organizations, people who don't have that outlook take those tools and do devastating, terrible things. Look at the like Ray Dalios of the world, Mr. The Fund. It's a great book, by the way. It's a journalist wrote a biography of the guy who started Bridgewater, Ray Dalio, I think you pronounce it. And it is cuckoo. I mean, the man absolutely tortured hundreds of people, but he was so elevated in our society because he had such financial success. And so then people are trying to replicate that. And then, but they're using tactics that are quite harmful. And unless you actually are a sociopath, you end up quite damaged from trying to replicate those kinds of tactics.
Yeah, and so many of the gurus, I mean, Napoleon Hill, one of the most influential American gurus of the 50s, who's basically saying, I studied with Andrew Carnegie and I learned from him the tools of effective business. And you go, I'd just like to stop you for one cotton picking minute Andrew Carnegie. Andrew
Yeah.
Carnegie caused the greatest disaster in US history, civilian disaster prior to 9/11, the Homestead flood,
Mm.
where because he wanted to widen the road by the reservoir, they pierced the reservoir. And there'd been lots of warnings about this before, and 2,000 people drowned. That's Andrew Carnegie. This
Yeah.
is the man who was having Chinese coolies dying, working for him, who was working people for a 12-hour day. He's also, of course, President Trump's. This is when America was great.
Where
He
would,
finally
right.
admitted it in January. It was between 1870 and 1913. I mean, I thought most American historians would say 1865 and 1917, but I'm not going to take any points off of that. The Gilded Age, the point where the American working man and woman did a 6-day week, 12 hours a day, with no health and safety, with no recompense when you lost your fingers in a machine. This was the great period because America was wealthy. And wealth is the measure of everything, as we have seen with the current administration. It's not about compassion. It's not about everybody having enough to eat. It's not about everybody having shelter. It's a view. And so you get somebody who says, well, look, Carnegie was this really successful guy, and this is how to be like him. And I'm going, I don't want to be like him. And the way you become like him is, in fact, the method that Hubbard used on himself, which is self-affirmation. You tell, and we've got the affirmations that Hubbard wrote in the 40s. They leaked, and Jerry Armstrong,
Mm.
my friend Jerry, has them on his site. Men are your slaves. Elemental beings are your slaves. You will be perfectly well after your Veterans Administration examination. He was trying to hypnotize himself into this thing. He was pretending so that he could be this thing. Werner is an illusion. Werner is not a
Well,
Buddha.
that's the thing I'm getting out of what you're saying is that the persona that no wonder they work so hard to hide, the harmful aspects of Werner's personality, right? They work so hard, and I had him screaming in my face, you don't know what it's like to have your whole life taken away from you, this whole tirade. And
And
I'm
his
like, well,
kids didn't know
yeah.
what it was like to have their whole lives taken away from
I'm
him.
like,
12
well,
and a
yeah,
half
I
bloody
don't.
years. He doesn't talk to his own family. What a sleazebag.
So,
His mum's an alcoholic because she doesn't know where he's gone. Deserts his 6-month-old child. Then he does the same in his second marriage while selling Est and uses his children and his wives, his ex-wife and his wife, to sell more, uses his family to sell more with the
right.
absolute deception that they have achieved this perfect relationship between them. No, they hadn't.
So
And
you
same
bring
with
this
Hubbard,
up.
you know.
Deception is really an important ingredient in
Yeah,
authoritarianism,
yeah,
right? So in totalitarianism, that there is, and I can definitely see that because there was so much, and I participated in a way, and I didn't even think about it. I did things like make sure that Werner's suite was a distance away from where any participants might hear the screaming and yelling and
mm,
crashing and banging that goes on in there. Um, and I didn't think a thing of it. I never actually thought at that time. I mean, I thought it was wrong,
mm,
but one of the things that you're kind of taught a lot in these movements is kind of to each their own. And as I say in my book, go along to get along. So my ability to earn and make a difference and build this was my client. My job was to protect the client
yeah,
in part. And but I wasn't really ever protecting the client. I wasn't that enamored with Werner. I like Werner. I liked Werner. People accuse me all the time of being angry. I'm like, I'm not angry with Werner. I would love to actually have some of these conversations with Werner. It would be so
yeah.
awesome.
If you're watching, Werner, join us next time.
Oh
Be
man,
happy
it would
to.
be
I'll even be
great. And
polite to you in person.
what I'm against is abuse. That's what I'm against. And I'm much more, this day and age now, I'm much more disappointed in Landmark than I am Werner.
Yeah,
Landmark has an organization and Harry and Joan as brother and sister who just, you know, despite so many opportunities to see what was harmful, what wasn't working, they just continued to double and triple and quadruple down on practices and tactics. But so the thing I'm really getting what you're saying is look, kind of, you got to look under the hood. How are these people actually living? And I think in organizations, you can look to their employees. How are the employees being treated? How do they feel? Because that's the expression, that's where the ideas or the values or the mission or the purpose or whatever thing you want to grab a hold of is actually being shown. Is it there? And there's some mix up in that. I did some work with a really big penny store kind of organization, and I was quite struck as I got closer to the inside and spent more time with management. The public reputation of this company is not nearly like the inside was way better than the outside.
Mm.
I mean, it really was. I was really surprised. I kept kind of like, whoa. I kept telling the CO guy, I said, you need better PR people because I'm in here sitting around tables with you guys, hearing what you're up to, what you're trying to create, and the constraints. I could do a whole rant about the stock market and the whole shareholder
Mm.
Milton Friedman disaster
Oh,
experiment that
absolutely.
we're living out right now, where these companies are so beholden to the shareholder that they can't move. They can't
Yeah,
actually.
Naomi Klein's shock doctrine for anybody who hasn't read it. Yeah.
It's just crazy. Like they don't realize that a lot of the company nonsense that has employees being treated so poorly is because the value is to the shareholder.
Mm.
And they're trying. I mean, I've sat at tables with these people. They're trying to be as put in place in this particular organization. They were very clearly doing everything they could to make it the best experience for the employees as possible while producing the profit that the shareholders demand.
Yeah.
And that's really who they're beholden to. They're not beholden to the community. They're not beholden to the employees. They're not beholden to even their values, standards, and ideals. Like they create those, but they always have to succumb to the almighty profit and the shareholder.
Because it is the law. You know,
Yeah,
that's where we've come to, that in the Western world. I'm anti-communist before anybody gets me wrong. I'm
me too.
anti-capitalist. I I am not pro-Republican. I find that impossible at the moment. I'm also have tremendous misgivings about the Democrats. Of course, I don't live in the US, but similarly with the politicians here, they're politicians. I don't believe that means that if their lips are moving, they're lying. But there's this kind of, well, we've got to look after the party, which is, you find this in all cults. We
Yes.
mustn't reveal the horrible things that are going on in the background. And authenticity goes. And there is an enormous human tendency. I have constantly recommended, since I read it, this book, um, The Dawn of
The Don't
Everything,
Envy.
A
Oh,
New
wow.
History of Humanity by Graeber and Wengrow, which Spike will put on. Now, they challenge the assumption that we're in a kind of single linear progression of evolution and that human
Yes.
society has to be this way by showing that there have been many variants on human society that have been successful. Always bring up the Indus Valley, which is Pakistan now, where for 700 years there was no warfare. Human beings lived together for 700 years, that's 21 generations, something like, without
Wow.
warfare. So it can be done. But
Yes.
our system, rampant patriarchal capitalism, where greed is God, you know, part of the research I've done in the last few months was looking into the how the Nazi Party was funded. And it was funded by billionaires. It was funded by people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos,
Mm.
Warren Buffett, what have you, Soros, all of these people who, if they had any decency, would have given their money away. They wouldn't be like Bill Gates saying, I've still got 200 billion and I'm going to give it all away, or Jeff Bezos, when I die, it'll all go away. No, they would have given it away. They would have said, this is enough to keep me, my kids, and my grandkids,
Yes.
and I'm going to put the rest into healthy, great projects to make sure that people don't starve to death, to make sure there's education, you know, and Bill and Melinda have given 100 billion, bless them, but they've still got too much to for me to feel that they're actually genuinely compassionate. that when you know that
Well,
this is still
they
happening.
have. I'm a Seattle girl, so watch out,
Mm.
trashing on the gates there.
Oh, sorry. A big Jimi Hendrix fan though, not into Kurt Cobain, but
Well, the whole well, and Bill Gates just came out with a thing he's going to give it all away by I can't remember what the year is,
20 years. Yeah,
20 in 20 years.
when
Yes,
he's
it's what he's
90.
90, yeah,
Yeah, he's the
between
same
now and
age
his
as
90.
me, believe it or not.
Yeah, and Melinda is d giving away enormous amounts. So is Warren Buffett. So they're in there. They're in the mix. But
That's the start of it. But when you still, the
yeah,
fact is that money is power.
yeah,
And while you are still keeping hold of that, investing it, using it in the industrial military complex or what have you, rather than saying, let's change the world today. I don't need this money. I'll keep 1 billion for myself.
yes.
That'll keep me going. The rest, let's immediately in the next 24 hours work out who to give it to and what to do with it. And that means setting up projects, of course, not just giving money to military dictators in third world countries. That
Well,
didn't work very
you're
well. So that they can buy armaments. That's not how it works. But doing something
and it
to
does not
actually,
trickle down either, by the way,
no,
in the normal. I mean, we're about to vote on, and unfortunately, it probably will go forward, despite I make my 5 calls a week yelling in my senators and congressmen. But
I
we're
think the
about to
Senate
have
will
the
stop it.
largest.
Yeah.
You think so? Because we're about to have the largest single transfer of wealth from the what's left of the bottom half to the upper
In
half
the
if
history of
this
the known
bill,
universe.
big beautiful bombshell bill passes. And people just don't know. They don't get it. So I really like this thing that you're saying about looking at the life and looking at what's actually lived. And I will confess it's uncomfortable. I would rather, so I started out saying, can we talk about does it really work? And it's mostly because I've been recently sort of like, oh, I kind of miss my fantasy life. I sort of miss the life where I believed that truly anything was possible if I was willing to invent
Mhm.
it as a possibility and enroll others in my having gotten. That's the landmark thing. I like the Werner that I did spend time with that,
Okay,
was
he drank a little too much and
charming
you had
and
to change his bag every now and then, but
oh yeah, well, a whole host of things, right? But on the other hand, he was charming and quaint and felt real and so it's
I've
interesting.
had friends who are sociopaths. There are people who are tremendously likable, but I would always count my fingers after I'd shaken hands with them. So I
Yeah.
can, they were amusing me and charming me. I get that, and that's
Yeah.
fine. But when
When
I
I do
listened to what they
think
were saying, they were telling me how they had amused and charmed others and taken their money from them, you know. Uh,
Well, and I do think that people like Werner. I mean, I think Werner, I doubt he likes me anymore, but I do think he did like me. He stood for me. Somebody put one of my trolls, speaking of, made a comment about all this money that I lost. I'm like, well, yeah, because I was offering my services at a 50% discounts,
sure.
giving 50% to the cause, in-kind contribution to the
Mm,
cause, not understanding or knowing that I was actually subsidizing it because I was paying out more than I was taking in to produce those programs for a period. And we're in debt because of that right now. And as well as some other things, not that alone. And Werner did look at me and was like, "Why are you doing that? Stop doing that. You should take your whole share." And I think he actually meant that.
mm.
And then I went to try to negotiate with his people to do that, and they were absolutely deplorable. I mean, deplorable in ways you cannot even imagine. They
Do you think he
said,
knew that they'd be deplorable when he said you should take that? How
I
far do you think his wisdom extended?
honestly, I have no idea. So Mike Jensen and I had a conversation about this one time, and here's how I kind of think it goes. John Hunter talks about this too, that a lot of this stuff, it's not somebody in a back room. It's Werner wants what he wants when he wants it. And he
Mm.
has got 50, 60, 70 years of training sycophants to make sure he gets it. And we see this happening with Trump as well, right? The gal that hands him the clips of the news stories that aren't they're not only not true nor even relevant to the thing he's talking about, but they give him what he needs to shore up his perception. I
Talking
think,
about Al Capone to the West Point graduates. So I've been
well,
investigated more than Alphonse, the late great, or the great
oh,
late Alphonse Capone. So
Well, and the whole
yeah,
South
okay.
African insanity that happened in the White, and she's
Yeah.
handing him clips, and
Afrikaners.
it's not even South African. It's not even,
And
accurate
Ramaphosa
to the
sat there
story.
going, "Tell me where this is. Tell me where this is." And you're going, "Ah, you're doing it. You're an evil person." It's like, but I don't know what you're talking about. And of course, no, there aren't 1,000 white farmers' graves. But
No.
yeah. So
But these people create around them their own problem because they create people that are terrified and will do anything to get them what they said they need to get them. So in this case, the people doing the negotiating for him, her job was to make as much money as possible for the Erhard Jensen initiative. And they felt that I was making more than, enough. And in fact, at one point, he brought in a bigger person to negotiate, kind of higher up, very, very wealthy guy that supported Werner's work for, since the essays. That's what happened. He did Est, and then he got all these wealthy people to support him, and he still lives on that. So does
that's how
Landmark.
Scientology works. It's not by
Yeah.
recruits anymore. It's by, the Duggans, Bob and Trish
Yeah.
Duggan, have given them $340 million.
Yeah.
It's
I can't
hard to
even imagine. I
kill.
mean, I know what my husband and I have given between our in-kind contributions, well, close to $1 million
Yeah.
in in-kind revenue that should have gone to us that went to them and that kind of thing. But then this person offered to loan me the money at a fair interest rate to put on the program for them.
Mm.
And I'm like, why would I do that to not eat? I'm already not recouping my costs. Now I'm going to have a loan cost. Like I'm pretty, young and naive in my entrepreneurial skills, but even I know that that's ridiculous. That's completely crazy. And besides, I'm holding all the money, so instead I'm just going to not give you the money until after I've got my money back.
Yeah.
And it was a huge deal. I managed to get of the 10% that I was giving in kind, I managed to get 2.5% back for one course. That was it. And still lost money. And it just there's no mutual care. And that's what happens. That's what most people don't understand. For Landmark graduates out there, if you got good stuff, I'm glad you got good stuff. And please keep that good stuff and keep the tools that work for you. Please work to understand them better so that you can apply them in the appropriate places and situations. That's another big piece that goes missing in my view is
Mm.
these trainers. We don't know. We're not taught, so we don't know, oh, I should only use that tool like the inauthenticity work in these very particular situations. Like it's not for everything.
No.
And keep it, but please also open your ears to the hundreds of former program leaders and staff that are in real pain,
Yeah.
that have real trauma, and they're afraid to speak out because they don't want to ruin people's transformation. That's what we were there for anyway. So we don't want to take that away. And two, we don't, people like that troll that'll lash back and just say, oh, you're just out to, make money, or you're out to get your own fame, or you're out to create your own organization, or any of that. Like, no. And to put yourself up, there's a reason why there's only about 6 people in the landmark sphere that are speaking up, that have actual direct experience as program leaders and staff. But there are hundreds that are not speaking, that are quietly in room, some of them hopefully listening to this conversation, trying to understand where did it all go wrong.
Yeah. And
Because
and and get over the guilt that's induced, which is the reason it went wrong is because you didn't do it properly.
yes, right.
You're not a good enough person, or
I'm
what have
a,
you.
I just did an interview with Brandon Hurst, fabulous young man. I learned in the interview, you should watch it. It was so
Mm.
shocking that he actually quit high school to go on staff at 18. He did the programs when he was 13. So goes on staff and is on staff till he's 22. And he's, leaves totally diminished,
Mm.
erased, and then very, very unhealthy. That's another thing, folks. If you're a former staff member out there and you're struggling with your weight, you're struggling with your health, you're struggling, there's a reason for that. And it's not just you. You can't work in an environment where your cortisol is just pumping and you're, complete adrenal fatigue and, under constant pressure and abuse and threat. day in and day out, day in and day out, because that's what it is to be a staff member. You're under
Yeah.
threat. If you don't get your job done, which is this made up weird Mission Impossible, you are going to cost the planet
Yeah. And then
transformation.
anyone that's demanding that you sleep less than 8 hours a day and that you don't sleep in a comfortable sleeping environment doesn't have your best interests at heart. Anyone who's insisting that you live on a high carbohydrate diet with cheap ultra processed food doesn't have your interests at heart. They are not going to transform society because you have to transform yourself. And I've got to say that having come away from anything transformational, and I've read a great deal about counseling and therapy because I wanted to understand how to approach people and how to help people. So, I got very interested in these ideas. I've read quite a lot about neurology. And I would profoundly recommend Robert A. Burton to anybody that's reading about neurology, Skeptic's Guide to the Mind. He
Mm,
was the head of neurology at Mount Zion, which is the University of California in San Francisco. He also wrote a book called On Being Certain, and he questions the claims that are being made. It's a 10-year-old book now, but he questions that. And I started reading these books. Oliver Sacks' Man Who Mistook His Wife for I read in 1984. And it blew my mind. It was wonderful to see, oh, it's not that people are necessarily mad, it's just that's the way they process things. And that bit's missing from their processing,
mm.
it's not functioning. And that's been very helpful to me. We are all neurodiverse. There you go. There, it's a terrible thing
Yes.
to say, but we are all different, um,
That's what
except
I'm
of
loving about Lisa Feldman's work. She's talking about we have the same art that you'll love the 7.5 lessons about the brain. It's just a little tiny book, but she just makes neuroscience really simple. I mean, she kind of explains it really well, great analogies, but she says we all have the same architecture, but then how we develop is very unique.
yeah,
How we develop around that architecture. And she uses the analogy of pruning, as we go along and we're in this kind of environment or that kind of environment or this kind of culture. And we're one of the only creatures that are born without a developed brain. And our brain develops through the first 25 to 27 years. And it's getting pruned and shaped that whole time. So that comes up with this incredibly diverse
yeah,
minds, which is part of why we're dominant because of that diversity. And anyway, it's really neat. I want to go back to one thing you said though, only because I'm always listening for where the landmark folks, which I do, my heart will always be a little bit with the landmark folks.
of course.
Um, and my heart now is that you be free and take your landmark tools with you. That's great. That's how it was always meant to be. Brian Regnier got on us all the time for you're not supposed to keep people. Stop having people volunteer for you year after year. You need to kick them out into the world, and which was a very unpopular opinion.
Yeah,
But in the landmark world, why it's so confusing is like what you just said. There was an agreement in one of the programs I was in that you had to be in bed with your eyes closed for 7 hours every night. That was one of the agreements. And if you were doing this one particular training,
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff about, okay, let's eat healthy. I got into, oh my gosh, you're gonna love this. I went on this vacation course, my husband and I. Had just coming off staff. I was just going on staff as a program leader, which meant I was traveling every week and whatnot. And we have these wonderful people, leader support, that feed you.
mm,
And I was always like getting people feed me healthy food, right? Get me. And we go on this one vacation course and we end up snuggling, hanging out with this other leader couple that are also on this course. In my division, we had these courses that were on vacations, which were
mm,
wonderful. And anyway, so we're with this couple, and he's super into bodybuilding and he's into Body for Life. And he introduces Dave and I to Body for Life, and we get all into Body for Life. This is like the late 90s, early
mm,
2000s. Dave is spending his one day off on Sunday, all day cooking these high protein, vegetable, low carb meals, putting them in containers so that we could work all week. I had another whole stint where everybody on my team went on to Anne Louise Gittleman's Fat Flesh plan. We were constantly doing these nutrition plans. Little anecdote about the Body for Life guy. He's currently sitting in jail because he killed his wife, who we sat with, spent time with as well. He killed her and then he tried to shoot the judge that was mediating their divorce. And he's currently in jail, still trying to get
Okay.
out, saying yes. So, anyway, just a little anecdote there.
Mm.
When I go back to does it work? I'm like, didn't work for him and definitely didn't work for her, this transformation stuff. But so the conversation in the culture is operating at peak performance, eating healthy, sleeping, having healthy working relationships. That's what you're there working on. But here's what you're not noticing. You're working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
You have to be at work. I remember when Dave was a center manager and he would leave the house at 8:30 and I was pissed when he wasn't home by 10, completely furious, ready to divorce him when he wasn't home by 10:30. And but mostly he would leave at 9:30 and come home and get home by 10. He would spend a little bit he never saw the kids because they're already in bed.
Mm.
And he would spend a little time with me. He'd go to bed with me and then he'd get up in the middle of the night to try and work on catching up on his communications. So he'd get up in the middle of the night from like 2 to 4 or 2 to 5 or something like that and try to catch up on the work that he couldn't do when he was in the center and he has all the people there talking to him.
Mm.
And then he'd come back to bed for a little bit and, sleep for a couple hours and get up and go. You can reading Lisa Feldman Barrett's book. I just read a thing that if you, within 2 hours of eating a meal, you have an adrenaline rush or a stressful situation, you literally add 111 calories. Research has shown this. So
Yeah.
you
If
have
calories have any
the
significance
calories,
whatsoever, which
but
I
that's what they
doubt.
happen to research and measure, right? But
Yeah,
the
it's an unfortunate measure because it's an inappropriate measure. And
I
I would
agree
point to
completely.
Tim
Yeah.
Spector if we want a guru who's actually
Yes,
done
don't count
the
calories. But
yeah.
the point here was I look over, staff members are so unhealthy. I was
Mm.
so unhealthy, even though I was doing and constantly engaged in the healthiest of habits that you could find at that time.
Mm.
I had leader support that made me these wonderful meals. I was 70 pounds overweight. Now, that's
Mm.
not about the weight. It's about what was going on in my
And
organs, what was
stressful
going on in my
situation, yeah.
hormones, I now have
Mm.
insulin resistance. I have an autoimmune condition.
Mm.
The number of staff members that have had cancer. And
In
um,
Scientology too.
it's just again and again, we see it over and over in an environment that the whole thing is about human potential.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's just tricky because day to day, you think you're doing all these things that are healthy for you. You
It's
think you're doing, and you think I worked 12 hours today, John, and I feel great.
mm.
It must be working.
I must have a lot of serotonin and dopamine in my system.
And I
I'm
feel good.
going to have to take a break at this very moment. Aha.
Werner explained to me once that we actually didn't have to go to the bathroom when we thought we had to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, well, you've had no babies.
Yeah,
So-
it's also true that he ended up having to have a bag, so it didn't work for him. Uh,
Well, and that's really because I wanted to talk to you today about does it really work? Like what do we see and how do you see that? And this conflict between it feels like it work. It feels good. And I think we should feel good. Like that's okay
some of the time,
some of the time, exactly. We don't need to feel good all of the time. But
best that
also
we
when
don't
our
if things are awful. It's best that we feel awful. Mm,
yeah, and sometimes what I'm seeing with so many of the people I'm working with is that their participation, some of the most damaging aspects of it, isn't what they got, it's what they didn't do because they were doing only that.
mm,
The kind of trauma recovery work for those that really experience serious, serious trauma. One of the
mm,
great things that happens in the forum is people actually go, "Whoa, that thing happened to me, and that was really bad. I was raped. In
mm.
my forum that this happened
Yeah.
for a woman. She completely like that was the quote unquote confession. And actually acknowledging that
Mm,
was powerful. However, where landmark, where we, and because I was part of the organization at the time, failed participants like that is that we didn't say, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You're opening that up for yourself. Now let's make sure that you get connected to the appropriate kind of resources to really help you to process that fully and appropriately. Because
Yes.
this, we would say that this isn't that. We would say
Mm.
that that was part of the thing we were taught as leaders, but we didn't particularly know what was the right thing.
And when you are stimulating those sort of experiences in people, it's incredibly irresponsible not
Yeah.
to know and not to have a wide understanding. I it bothers me. I watched a couple of years ago. I watched a Tony Robbins thing, and there was a young woman in the audience who came up, and there were hundreds of people in the room who came up with something awfully traumatic. And so he had three people who were complete strangers to him and to her adopt her as uncles, and they would call her up from then on. And you're going, these, what are you doing? This
Oh,
is
that happened all the time in landmark
this is
programs. Yeah,
it's
you would
just
take on each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just unbelievable that I mean, the great complaint about any of these systems is you have people who are untrained. You have people who really don't know. And yes, people end up dead. People
Hmm.
commit suicide because of what happened afterwards. And that's then covered up. There's not a hmm.
Yes.
So
Well, and you're not when you're to me, I always use the analogy of building a house. So we're building a house right now up in the Pacific Northwest, and if we were trying to build a house with only a screwdriver and a hammer, it would take a really long time and probably be a pretty shoddy house. It probably wouldn't last very long.
yeah,
And to me, that's kind of a lot of the problem is the larger problem. There's a problem in the people who do these programs and have psychotic breaks and have psychological, direct and immediate psychological impacts. And folks, there are plenty out there. There's lots of lawsuits. There's lots of why do you think they have whole departments that are set up to defend against that and so on.
yeah,
But that's a smaller part of the problem. The bigger part for me is people who get involved in these groups and stay and stay and stay and don't necessarily go get like our guy who stabbed his wife and tried to kill the judge. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that guy was a longtime program leader, and being a program leader fed whatever wasn't right in that guy from the beginning. His name's Darren Mack, by the way. There's all kinds of media on him. Somehow Landmark has managed to completely separate itself from all the media around him, which shows you the depth of their Department of Defense, I call it, otherwise known as PR. I mean, we found four murders, actually, cases around murders where people who were involved in some way, two of them, people directly left a program and went and murdered somebody.
yeah.
So there is a danger. And even if that's only
Charles Manson, Scientology, Charles
one
Manson.
half of 1% of the people, it's still something we need to know about and understand and have at least, at the very least, have our program leaders know what to look for and where to report and what to do when they
Program
see
leaders
these
have
kind of things.
have to be psychologically trained so they can tell
Yeah.
that they're dealing with somebody who has ADHD, who has malignant narcissism, who whatever has borderline, whatever is being presented, that they should be able to see that as well as any other professional psychologist. So they should have a master's degree in psychology before running these programs. It's one of the terrible
Mm,
stumbling blocks. I investigated 38 suicides in 1993 when I
mm.
was the president of FactNet way back then. Um, and I wasn't running it, but they needed a figurehead, and I was known. So, but I was given this project of researching suicides, and I found that the suicide rate in Scientology was about 10 times what it was in the US and the UK, about 10 times what it was. And investigating those individual cases, some of them in significant depth, found out a lot about these people. I also had a case where a guy had thrown himself in front of a high-speed train and he survived. And the
Oh my
police said
God.
they had never seen anything like it. But it meant that he was able to tell me what had led up to this, what he had done in Scientology that had brought him to this conclusion. I had people who'd, you know, gone mad, gone psychotic at some point, and the cover-ups were incredible. Almost none of these cases. One of them I worked on for 18 months with the Sunday Express newspaper, and eventually the Express didn't run the story because of
Wow.
threats from the woman's mother and legal threats from Scientology. It was like we had absolutely proved that she was under what was called a baby watch in Scientology, where she had 24-hour watch, and she had a 2-year-old at the time.
Wow.
And she took her own life as soon as she could. She'd grown up in Scientology. It never got to the media. And that sort of, that these awful, Danny Masterson finally going to
Yes.
prison for rapes committed 20 years ago, covered up by Scientology. You kind of go, so you're good people and you're doing good in the world and you're creating transformation. No, that there's something profoundly wrong here. Consider the tree by the fruit that it bears. There's
Well, and
statement.
remember that built into all these systems is when the bad things happen, that's on you. When the good things happen, that's on us. And that's another massive red flag. It isn't that there isn't some truth. Yes, maybe that person was ill ahead, but still a responsibility on the
The responsibility
organization.
for the organization is
Yeah.
to find out what is the condition of the person when they come to you. Scientology started after the Karen Henslow case in the 60s, who was a schizophrenic who went running out onto the street in the middle of the night. And it wasn't their fault. I did find somebody who was in the house the night it happened who wasn't a Scientologist, and it wasn't their fault. She was genuinely psychotic. That was
Yes.
my
Right.
conclusion. However, what they did then was to screen anybody that had had psychiatric treatment out. So they wouldn't have these problems
Well,
rather than having somebody there who actually understood. So that if somebody started to exhibit psychotic symptoms during a course, they would route them. Now, of course, Scientology sealed off because psychiatrists, according to Hubbard, psychologists and psycho the rapists, as they call them,
oh my God.
anybody with psych in their title, which is just the Greek word for spirit or butterfly, anybody with psych in their title is part of a universal conspiracy to destroy all life. That's what Hubbard said. So
Wow.
you
Yeah, see,
cannot
Landmark had all these very
approach these
watered
people.
down versions of all that. I mean, they
Yeah,
definitely had Landmark programs are, and I'm sure they still have this, are only for well people. So if you're experienced, and there's
to make the
big
able more
warnings.
able. Yeah.
Yeah, there's big warnings on the forms. And one of them I read recently even says, if you suffer from bipolar disorder, we recommend that you not do this program.
This will cause more trouble than you're worth.
And that leaders are, I know as a wisdom leader, we were definitely taught how to notice if somebody was dealing with depression or, whatever. And basically, we were taught to not, don't force that person into anything. Let that person participate how they want to participate. Let them do the homework how they want to do the homework. Now, I led from a division that was more based in it's called consulting services. I'm sure probably very similarly straight out of Landmark. And we were not to intervene on people. That wasn't what we were doing. We genuinely posed inquiry and let people find whatever they found. There was no place to get people to, no idea for them to adopt. That was what was different about the division that I led in, which is why I think when I started kind of drifting back and looking at the other division, I was like, what are these people doing? Like, why are you doing that? Why are you trying to get through to somebody or interrupt their reality or all of that? But the greater harm is in, again, I just keep saying it because I want all the staff and program leaders out there to hear that it wasn't you. It just wasn't you. You're not the problem. And being indoctrinated into that you are the problem, you are why the world doesn't work, you are why the world is not transformed, is pure bullshit. And you need healing from that mindset that you can't cure that by yourself. You can't cure that with a few other people who are in that same system. You really do need. I'm learning this so much with the work we're doing with Rachel Bernstein, which has been nothing short of miraculous,
She's great. Yeah.
to just get on these calls with her and just say, okay, but wait a minute. What about this? Is this healthy? Is that unhealthy? Is this idea, is that good for me? Or did that, whatnot. And then now we're at the place we're hardly even talking about Landmark stuff. We're mostly starting, the people in the group are starting to deal with the things that they went to Landmark to deal with,
Mm.
but they're recognizing 15 years later that it didn't actually deal with that.
Yeah, they
I'm
may
starting,
have had peak experiences, they may have got high, they may have had wins, but the problem, this was the first year I left Scientology, and I saw hundreds of former members in that time. I was always asking, what was it that convinced you it worked? And what was the problem you had when you went to it? And I didn't talk to anybody who had resolved the problem they had when they arrived.
That's
Just
funny
that,
because mine
just
was
that way.
procrastination. That's what I put on my form was
Mm.
procrastination. And of course, I wanted to save my marriage, which I ended up breaking up, and that was a good choice. But
Yeah.
and good stuff along the way. In my leadership program, I did come into my own. I got a kind of confidence in myself that has served me well, and
Mm.
I started to believe in myself in a way that some of the choices I made in my younger years wasn't making easy. And so there are value, and that I think that's
Yeah.
worth hanging on to. But does it work? No. I mean, I would just in my personal experience, not for what I think it worked for, I
No.
guess would be the thing. Do you know, it had some benefits for sure, but did it work in terms of making me a more capable, able, higher productive person? Sort of, right up
Yeah.
until I burned out completely and was sick,
Mm.
really sick. And I'm still dealing with that sickness to this day. And I'm still dealing with the repercussions. And then also being 56 and trying to figure out what to do with my life and trying to figure out how to move forward with, okay, I got all these skills, but how do you put those to work in the rest of the world
Yeah.
is an interesting question. I know a lot of former staffers that are really struggling. They can't support themselves. The stock plan that was supposed to support us all in our retirement has completely gone bust, the ESOP and GSOP, because the organization is failing. So, yeah,
Mm.
interesting. Well, we should probably start to wrap it up only because I have a lunch date in an hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, John, I really appreciate these conversations and
Me
I
too.
appreciate your show so much. I love the way you engage in the just invite conversation that gets us thinking. That's what I always loved about this work anyway.
Yeah. And
So
uh,
turns
and
it,
I think that's a that fundamental thing of discussion and debate, and that if you're involved in any kind of group, talk to people who are not involved in it. Talk about what the ideas are. And the thing is that ultimately, whether your experience is good or bad, if you can integrate it, if you can digest it, it's good. So
mm,
Viktor
okay.
Frankl, he went through Dachau and Auschwitz and came out doing his logotherapy is incredible and amazes me that nobody really seems to do it very much anymore. These other systems like cognitive behavioral triumphed, but he had insights because I think he started out an incredible and amazing person, but he managed to come away from that experience. When we talk about trauma, what we're talking about really doesn't add up to
No.
a couple of years in concentration camps. But he managed to make something good and positive of that. So we can manage to make something good and positive of it. It doesn't mean that if we feel broken that we're wrong.
Yeah.
That's, and there is healing. There can be healing. But we should have an understanding of the world that is increased and hopefully more compassion and more humility as a consequence of having been through these things. And I mean, for myself, I
Mm,
was never happy when I was in Scientology. Yes, I was euphoric, but I was never
mm,
happy. I had all sorts of great hypnotic experiences of feeling wonderful and feeling I could do anything. And I achieved things. I had my first one-man show as a painter when I was 26 in London. I managed to do things, recorded
sure.
records, all sorts of stuff. But I was not happy. I was
Mm,
just not happy. I am now. And I think that's a rather unusual thing. And I'm happy because of the relationships I have. And I have to deal with awful problems on a daily basis, which thankfully are not to do with my own health, but they are to do with
yeah.
people I love who, there,
Right.
there are
Me too.
difficulties. But nonetheless, I feel resolved. I'm not, and I think part of my unhappiness was the constantly searching, constantly trying to find something that would cure me of being unhappy. And being happy to
Yeah.
me comes from, when people say what kind things, such a thing you've just said, which is it's useful. What I'm doing with my
Yeah.
life is useful to other people. And that makes me feel good. There is one thing that comes up through this conversation, which is
Hmm.
I've thought about for a long time. We're trying in the West to introduce democracy. It's a very modern idea. It really, and we've created nation states, which I'm not sure are very helpful because they create tribal identities. But the tradition of humanity is to have an aristocracy and elect a group of superior people. This is where the Nazis got off, and
Yeah.
Arthur Gobineau's theories of Aryanism, that they were actually born superior to other people and they're proles and plebs. And that thing of the divine right of kings, of people accepting their place in society. So a cult group is rather like Downton Abbey. There are the
Yes.
people at the top
Upstairs, downstairs.
upstairs, downstairs before. And of course, Julian Fellows comes from the aristocracy. So the guy who wrote it, I thought he was having a go at them, but he is one of them. And it's quite brilliant. I mean, the Gilded Age
Yes.
is his as well. Seeing where people just accept that they're inferior, accept that they're broken, accept that there's something wrong with them, rather than going, yeah, this is who I am. I have these talents. I don't have those. Somebody suggested to me a few months ago that I think I'm superior. And it was so what a thought. Superior to what? In what way? You know,
Mm,
there are things that I can do. I can wallpaper a wall, for example, no problem. I know how to do that. There are other things like flying an aeroplane that I can't do. And so I can't see what the point scoring would be to make. But
right.
what these groups do is give you that sense of being the elect, the electoi, as the Gnostics had it. The
Definitely
you know,
the drug of the leadership roles, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, I've got, and I hit the height of that. I was traveling around with Werner, the source of
yeah.
all of it, and I won't lie, it was seductive. It was
Mm,
cool. It was fun for a little bit, and then it was so boring. I can't even tell you how boring, how quickly it became boring.
yeah,
And how quickly I remember staying in this suite that they gifted, the Ritz-Carlton. I hosted a lot at the Ritz-Carlton. They gave us this lovely suite up on the club floor,
mm,
my husband and I. And we always turned our suite into the community center. That was the
yeah,
office. That's where we held meetings and we did film taping. We did everything there. And but we're staying in this fabulous suite. And yeah, it was really cool. And it was the most uncomfortable, unfunctional thing that I've lived in. And it was funny in the pandemic, all that, of course, well, I ended the project also in 2019, but then the pandemic comes and all that goes away and we start road tripping and we are staying in like the grimiest motels, in these, because we want motels that we can go into. We don't have to go into a shared space. My
mm,
husband and I got through the pandemic. As far as we know, neither one of us ever got COVID.
yeah,
And so we're road tripping all the time and seeing all these national parks and staying in these very lowbrow, motels and hotels and so on, because money was incredibly tight. We had no income. And then about halfway through, I had the opportunity with my husband. We worked with Choice Hotels, and we stayed at this. It was formerly a Ritz-Carlton on Florida. And I got to go along as the wife, so my job was just to lounge around and read books and enjoy the spa and whatnot. And I hated it. I was sitting in this five-star luxury hotel, and I was like, yuck, I don't
yeah,
like this. So I'm now so happily enjoying things. I would say to your experience, that's interesting. I was happy a lot, and
mm,
mostly because of the community and the
yeah,
position. The position was great. I was getting to participate in a very intellectually stimulating,
mm,
hanging out with and meeting a lot of amazing academics and things like that. I loved that. I loved the graduates that I worked with and played with, still do. My
mm,
book, one of the miracles of it for me is it's brought a lot of those people back into my life. I did not expect that. Just so grateful for that. So I had a lot of joy in that. What I'm learning to live in is boring. I'm learning to not make that I don't feel high wrong.
mm,
That it's okay to just kind of putter through a day. I
mm,
don't have to be saving the world. I don't have to be, I don't even, anybody listens to me knows my daughter has complex trauma and, really struggles with that. And that's plenty for me, to
mm,
support her to, be as well as she can be and as functional as she can be in her life. And I want my work to be useful. I want
mm,
it to forward the greater good rather than reverse it. And I want to heal my own things, my own whatever, whether it's from previous to landmark life or landmark life. but mostly learning how to not crave that high, that possibility high. That's taken something. And the little group that I'm working with, that we're all kind of like, wow, and to not immediately go into when something's wrong, that there's something wrong with us that needs to be transformed so that the world can be right.
Yeah.
No, that was misleading, and
Yeah.
that is not accurate. So I say being well often means it looks boring after having been in a group like that where you're constantly
Mm.
going on to this big high. And age helps because I just can't do it anymore. Like, I just can't. It's too exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But okay, it's been a great conversation as
Yeah,
ever,
thank you,
and
John.
we'll get together again in a couple of months' time, and
Absolutely.
maybe by then you'll have read my new book because maybe by then my new book will have been released.
I
And
want to help launch it. I
great,
loved opening our minds. I want to let's have a serious conversation about doing a book discussion around that book as well, like we're
great.
doing with Ed's transformation. So,
Let's
yeah, thank you.
let's do it. Thanks so
Till we
much.
meet again.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.